animal's behavior can be learned or innate. A learned behavior is derived from personal experience or by observing another individual. On the other hand, an innate behavior exists naturally from birth and requires no learning. Alarm calling is a behavior where one individual sends auditory signals to another to warn them of incoming threat or predation. In response, the receiver of the call modifies its behavior by increasing vigilance, decreasing foraging time, or by running away to ensure its survival. These responses to alarm calls could either be learned or innate. Previous research supports that alarm calls between individuals of the same species is an innate trait. In other words, they can detect and react to alarm calls from birth. However, some species are known to respond to the alarm calls of other species. This is known as heterospecific eavesdropping because an individual listens to the alarm calls of other species to gain information, often of a common predator. Heterospecific eavesdropping is thought to be a learned trait, but the evidence isn't clear.
Let's take mule deer for example. In the Rocky Mountains, mule deer are observed to respond to marmot alarm calls to avoid predation by coyotes, a shared predator. But is this trait learned or innate? What would happen if mule deer lived separately from marmots and natural predators? To answer this question, we conducted a study on Santa Catalina Island. On the island, mule deer live with ground squirrels, but there are no marmots or natural predators. We conducted playbacks using 3 different types of calls and recorded the time allocated to vigilant or foraging behaviors before and during the playback experiment to see how their behaviors would change. We expected that mule deer would increase vigilance in response to ground squirrel alarm calls because they live together and historically share common predators, and that they would not change their behavior in response to spotted towhee song calls since these calls don't indicate danger. We predicted that mule deer would also not change their behavior in response to marmot alarm calls because they were never exposed to them and thus the trait is learned.
And what did we find? As it turned out, mule deer did not increase their vigilance in response to marmot alarm calls compared to the spotted towhee song call, which led us to conclude that mule deer responses to marmot alarm calls are learned rather than innate. However, we also found that mule deer did not increase their vigilance in response to ground squirrel alarm calls compared to their response to the spotted towhee song calls, and that's puzzling because we expected to see opposite results. This could be explained by the fact that although ground squirrels and mule deer historically share predators, they did not have any common predators on the island, and therefore it would not be beneficial to respond to ground squirrel alarm calls because it may take away time and energy that they could be using to forage.
So while our studies supported our predictions, we need more information to be conclusive with our results. Future studies should be conducted to see whether mule deer will respond to ground squirrel alarm calls on the mainland, which would allow us to compare between living with and without predators. Regardless, our results helped us understand how community structure should help shape the behavior of prey species. Thank you and bye.